Major, we'll go ahead and send it back to you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Lindsay. I'm joined here in Fiserv Forum by Nancy Cook, Senior National Political Reporter for Political. Nancy, your impressions of the afternoon and the JD Vance news.
Well, I think that the JD Vance news is not hugely surprising. We've known that he was going to be, he's been on the short list for a while. He had huge support from the Trump family. Don Jr. really wanted him. And he just has like a group of operatives around him who have really been pushing for him. I think that.
And he's been auditioning in a very public way. And look, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about auditioning, that's not a derisive way of describing how former President Trump thinks about these things. He really does think in ways where he wants people to prove themselves on his terms.
Absolutely. And Vance really has proved himself the last few weeks. He was responsible for setting up a huge fundraiser in California for former President Trump, which brought in a bunch of money and also sort of bringing along the crypto industry. He has been an attack dog on television, at multiple key points of that campaign, and you just can't discount that. And also, he's young. I mean, I think the Trump campaign feels like he will stack up really well in the vice presidential debate against Kamala Harris because he's young, he's a Marine, he's very good on TV, and he's very sharp on his feet.
Talk to me about the fundraising angle, because Peter Thiel plays prominently in JD Vance's political pedigree and is a possible pathway into financial resources that the Trump campaign has identified as necessary and might now have a better access to.
Absolutely. JD Vance has ties both in Silicon Valley, but you have to remember that he also worked in private equity for a while. And so, it's sort of a signal to donors in finance who have been reluctant to support Trump, although we do see them coming off the sidelines, that their VP pick is sort of one of them at least.
And a access point in the future, possibly. And Finn Gomez and I were discussing this. I'd like your perspective, Nancy, for President Biden's reelection campaign. No three states are more central to the Electoral College map at this point, as we understand the map, than Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It is my sense, in the mere moments after this announcement, that there's going to be a bus that JD Vance is going to be on that's basically going to just circle those three states over and over and over. And it's going to be relentless, grassroots JD Vance in those three states, in addition to former President Trump. But what you do with a vice presidential pick is you sort of assign a political task. And the task at hand is to move into those states, it seems to me.
Absolutely. And I know just from talking with Trump world sources that, part of the calculation was who could help, which vice presidential pick could help them win over voters. And there was a sense that if you had picked Senator Rubio, he would have helped with Hispanic voters. But JD Vance, they felt like could really help them lock up the Rust Belt and those swing states that you mentioned. And I think that was a huge part of the calculus as well.
How much do you think his age is a factor in this for the nation? 39 years old. Very short stint in the United States Senate. We learned this weekend of the vulnerabilities, the potential for terrible things happening in this country in a political context. Everyone's talking about pulling back from that, but the specter looms over this entire campaign. It will not possibly not loom over this campaign until it ends.
Absolutely. And he is, he's just 39, as you said. He's very young. He has a young family. And I think that will be, that is a way to signal to Republican voters, if anything did happen to former President Trump, there is someone young who could step in. Not just that, but I think that, Trump can only serve one term and really wants to sort of set up a successor. And that's what he's going to do with Vance. I mean, Vance is going to be sort of the MAGA movement successor to him for 2028, when there's also a really strong bench of Democratic governors.
No question about that. And as this convention begins to play out, and I want to let our audience know how things are going. We're working through the delegate roll call. It's all formulaic now. We saw just a few moments ago over the top. It's all official. But there are some delegations we're going to be preparing to listen to. We're going to listen to the North Carolina delegation, the Arkansas delegation, and the Virginia delegation, because those who will announce their delegates figure prominently in current Republican Party politics. Mark Robinson in North Carolina is the Republican nominee for governor. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Arkansas, sitting governor, former press secretary in the Trump White House, and of course Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, who, Nancy, I don't know if you picked this up this afternoon, but there was a little bit of last-minute buzz around Glenn Youngkin.
There was. I thought, well, that could just be a real surprise.
That could be a real surprise, and it could be like Virginia. That's going to be this electoral play for the campaign. Didn't play out that way, but it was clear that there was last-second Youngkin buzz here in Milwaukee.
Well, not just that, but you have to remember that Youngkin will be done with his term. You know, he will be done with his gubernatorial term. And so I could see him getting a job in the Trump administration at some point. You know, not the VP pick, but, you know, some sort of cabinet post.
It's worth pointing out, to pick up on Nancy's point, that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and this is something that Virginia's always had in its modern era, it's unusual. Governors only serve one term.
I know, right?
I mean, it's a really big deal.
It's very unusual. It's like you learn the job and then you're out.
And then you're out, exactly. So we will be waiting for those delegations when they come up. But in the meantime, Nancy, as we started our coverage, I said, welcome to a National Party convention like no other in the modern era. I mean, we just can't overlook. We can't sort of like, oh, well, that was yesterday. No. What happened on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania is a trauma that will flow through this convention and will flow through the Democratic National Convention in certain ways, things that they might have contemplated saying that they won't say in the ways that they were thinking about, and the remainder of this campaign. It was such a shocking set of events, and we're going to get the first sort of expression of those events, how they are internalized by the Republican Party here, but the nation will continue to internalize this until November 5th.
Absolutely, and we saw sort of a bipartisan outpouring for former President Trump. You know, everybody sort of coming out and saying, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. We're so sorry this happened to you. And I think it is a moment, you know, a source told me it's a moment for Trump where he has a huge amount of sympathy. And just politically, I think that they are going to try to use that this week to, you know, appeal to new voters who may have discounted him, swing state voters, or white suburban women who they've had a problem with. You know, they need to expand their coalition beyond the Republican primary base. And I think that sort of building on this theme of unity that we've seen Trump talking about on Truth Social will extend throughout the week as they try to do that.
And I think the most obvious manifestation of that relook and that emphasis on at least party unity came yesterday, when the former president's campaign and those leading this convention reversed course and invited Nikki Haley, who was not to appear here, who was not disinvited, but wasn't even in the conversation about being invited. Now she will have a primetime slot on Tuesday.
Absolutely.
What do you think that tells us?
Well, I think it tells us that they are trying to appear like they're rising above sort of divisiveness and hatred, you know, coursing through the political
and their
discourse.
own internal disagreements. I mean, remember, famously, during the primaries, former President Trump referred to Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, served as his first UN ambassador, as bird brain.
Right, for weeks.
Dismissively, yes.
Well, I also think, you know, they are really underwater with white suburban women who feel really put off by the abortion restrictions that the Republican Party has espoused over the last 2 years and the overturning of Dobbs. And I think that, you know, having Nikki Haley on board is also, you know, an attempt to try to appeal to that group.
Interesting in that light, JD Vance doesn't help much there. JD Vance has a very strong, and this is the orientation, this is their phraseology, pro-life position. And in Ohio, when there was a referendum on this very question, Ohio amended its constitution to make room for abortion rights in a kind of a surprise result. The magnitude, not necessarily the ultimate result, but how large that majority in Ohio was. So JD Vance doesn't necessarily help in that part of the Republican Party communication.
But I think so much of their strategy right now is to expand the coalition by appealing to young black men and Hispanics. And I think JD Vance can help with that because he is also young. You know, he's very online. He's an attack dog. You know, I think he will carry the president's message. And so I think he will, you know, build on that.
Nancy, hold on for just 1 second. I want to go back to the floor to talk to Ed O'Keefe, who is moved from Ohio to North Carolina, the ever intrepid Ed O'Keefe. Ed, take it away. Oh, well, that was misread of the situation on the floor, Nancy. Ed O'Keefe is probably intrepid as ever, probably moving. And when you're moving, ladies and gentlemen, the microphone sometimes goes with you, sometimes it doesn't. This is what live television is like, an ever-evolving event like a National Party convention. So, Nancy, continuing the conversation. Anything else about this first day that you're looking for, that you're going to be sort of analyzing tonight as this moves into the primetime hours and we get out of the official party business, convention business?
Well, what I'm looking for is, each day sort of has a theme.
Right.
And so today they're really talking about the economy and what they're dubbing as wealth. And so I'll just be interested to see how they talk about that. So much of their message has been, Biden has been terrible on inflation. But I'm curious to see, if that message sort of expands beyond that. And also if they talk more about what Trump would do in a second term if he's reelected on the economy, rather than just sort of bashing grocery prices under Biden.
And that's an interesting observation, Nancy. I'm sorry. I'm just being handed a note very quickly from my producer, Arden Fari. So, again, we're in live television. This is ever evolving. JD Vance, the Ohio senator, got a call, rather. The note has been handed me. I'm reading the note, so follow with me, folks. JD Vance, the Ohio Republican senator, got the call from former President Trump 20 minutes before the Truth Social post. That's an indication, Nancy, of the what I've come to expect in the Trump world. Things happen quickly, and things happen in a very tight sequence, entirely driven by former President Trump.
Absolutely. And, even until, I got here on Saturday, even until then, I think Trump was still having conversations with the candidates, up until that rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, about, what they would bring. He was still sort of interviewing them, and he was still competing. And my reporting shows that, he didn't really let Senator Rubio or Governor Burgum know that they were not the picks, also till right before that. Everybody was clued in, just really 30 minutes before the Truth Social.
And the point to make there, ladies and gentlemen, is not only does former President Trump drive this process, and everyone around him knows he drives it, but he drives it in his way to, and this is a skill that he has developed, and the country, at least for the Republican Party, has fully embraced. He understands how to build drama and how to leave things unresolved and how to have things sort of build into a kind of mini crescendo. This isn't the ultimate crescendo. Trust me, in the next 3.5 days, we'll have more crescendos here. Mark my words. But this is a mini crescendo entirely directed by the former president.
Absolutely. And he was just building suspense throughout it. And, I feel like, there's a chance that we may see him later today in the arena, in which case, that will be a very suspenseful moment. He will be out in public since his assassination attempt.
Right.
And
Nancy, if I had a vast fortune, which I don't, I don't even have a nominal fortune, but whatever fortune I might possess, I would bet all of it that he will be here tonight, the former president, in one way or another.
I would too.
To electrify this convention, to personify his sense of, I survived, I'm here, we're together, and we are going to take this moment and launch this convention in a way that I know the former President Trump will want to think of as memorable and want to convey visually as memorable. I want to go back down to the convention. We are one delegation away. We're going to listen in. We'll go through that first delegation. Then we're going to listen to North Carolina, Arkansas, and Virginia. Let's go to the floor, ladies and gentlemen.
Donald J. Trump.
Pursuant to the announcement of the delegation and the rules and procedures, the U.S. Virgin Islands, 4 votes, President Trump.
There you go, sir.
North Carolina. North Carolina, 74 delegates.
Madam Secretary, I am Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, and God willing, I will be the next governor of North Carolina. North Carolina is the Tar Heel state. North Carolina is the home of the longleaf pine, and North Carolina is indeed, woo, the state that is and always will be first in flight. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the state of North Carolina, I am directed that the state to cast 62 votes for America's Braveheart and the next president of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, for president. And 12 votes in accordance with the rules.
North Carolina, 62 votes, President Trump. 12 votes to be cast pursuant to the rules and procedures of this convention. Arkansas, 40 delegates.
Madam Secretary, Chairman Wadley, I am Joseph Wood, Chairman of the Republican Party of Arkansas, the natural state, the land of opportunity, home of the 47th Governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Yes. Also home of the National Federation of Republican Women, Julie Harris, Johnny Cash, Al Green, and the Little Rock Nine Civil Rights Movement. We cast our 40 votes to continue to fight and save America with Donald J. Trump. Our votes for Donald J. Trump. Woo big Louie!
Arkansas, 40 votes, President Trump. Virginia, 48 delegates.
Madam Secretary, on behalf of the great Commonwealth of Virginia, named last week by CNBC as America's top place to do business. Home to 850,000 of the greatest Americans, our military and veteran heroes. Home to Washington, Madison, Monroe, the first governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the voice of liberty, Patrick Henry, and home to Thomas Jefferson, who penned the most immortal words that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Proudly, as Governor of Virginia, along with our great chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, Rich Anderson, we cast our delegate votes for the next president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and his vice president, JD Vance.
Virginia, 42 votes, President Trump. 6 votes to be cast pursuant to the rules and procedures of the convention. Michigan, 55 delegates.
Madam Chairwoman, I rise from the great state of Michigan, where the Republican Party was founded under the Oaks on July 6, 1854.
The roll call of delegates continues here on the convention floor on the Fiserv Forum. Nancy Cook, final thoughts on the day. I mean, it's only half over, so I don't mean your final thoughts. I mean your near final thoughts.
I mean, I think it's just, you know, the last month of the election has been so wild and so surprising, from Biden's performance in the debate to the assassination attempt.
And the intervening 2 weeks of Democratic turmoil about what the debate performance did or didn't mean to the future of the president's re-election bid.
So I just think that the tone and tenor of the election is sort of shifting week by week at this point. And it does seem like Trump has a huge advantage at this point, but so much has changed in the last month that, you know, TBD on what happens.
Let me just ask you before you go, Nancy, because it happened this morning, though it feels, because political news moves so rapidly and things that just happened can sometimes feel like they happened so much longer ago than they actually did. There was a significant legal development today.
Yes.
Let us not forget, ladies and gentlemen, we haven't even talked about it, not even for 5 seconds. Eileen Cannon, the district federal judge, dismissed the classified documents case and allegations of obstruction of justice, not only against former President Trump, but the two other named defendants. Yes, that can be appealed. Yes, that can be reviewed judicially, but nevertheless, that will be part and parcel of the conversation tonight and throughout this convention.
Absolutely, and legal experts really thought that that was the strongest and most damning case against the former president, that he had kept and hid classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, where club members sort of come and go, during the season.
Not secured as they should be, and there were gentle attempts to retrieve them and conversations and efforts that did not manifest themselves to the satisfaction of the government. Then an FBI raid under a search warrant authorized by a judge, and then the charges, and all of that now, for the moment, legally off the board.
I think that the former President Trump has just had tremendous luck legally in the last 6 months, and part of it comes from, judges and justices he appointed, like his 3 picks for the Supreme Court that ruled in his favor in the immunity case. But also, he's just had tremendous luck with this documents case getting dismissed. The sentencing for his hush money trial in New York, where there were 34 felony convictions, was essentially pushed off because of the Supreme Court ruling. He's just had a lot of things legally go his way.
And speaking of that 34 felony conviction in New York, here at the convention site in Milwaukee, Nancy, I'm sure you've seen them. There are T-shirts that people can and do buy that say, "I'm voting for the felon."
Oh, yes, it's a point of pride here. It's not, it's part of this whole narrative that MAGA world feels, that Trump survived 2 impeachment attempts. He's survived these legal cases where people are trying to drag him down. And now you add to that, he survived an assassination attempt.
Perseverance, a theme here. Nancy Cook, such a great pleasure. Thanks so much for all your help. Lindsay, back to you in New York.
Nancy Major, thanks so much. Anthony is still here with me. And Anthony, we were discussing here at the Broadcast Center, Nikki Haley. She had released her 97 delegates, and you pointed something out to me in the proceedings as we're watching them live.
Yeah, just to kind of button up that earlier conversation, it didn't sound like they actually said Nikki Haley. They didn't. I didn't hear them when they came to states like North Carolina and Virginia, where she, in fact, won a handful of delegates. So what they did was they said, well, pursuant to the rules, those votes will be cast, but they didn't say Nikki Haley. And what I think happens there is they want to show a unanimous front. They want to show a unified front. And so that's how they get that through the rules.
Let's keep pulling at that thread of JD Vance, political newcomer, 39 years old, been Ohio senator, junior senator for a year and a half. Let's go back to 2022. He narrowly won against Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan had actually tried to distance himself from the Democratic Party. JD Vance had tried to tie Tim Ryan to Biden's economic policies, of course, inflation, what people are feeling when they go to the grocery store, et cetera. Vance had never held public office before. He was a Marine veteran, venture capitalist. Remind us of 2022, how close, how expensive that race was, and really what put him over the edge.
Expensive, but I actually want to rewind back to 2012, where I think part of this story begins, which is that Barack Obama won Ohio when he ran for re-election in 2012. Since then, you have seen a shift in Ohio, along with elsewhere, specifically in white working class and white non-college degree holding voters away from the Democratic Party and into the Republican camp. And so go back then to 2022, where JD Vance does well among that core, what is now a core part of the Republican Party, of the MAGA base, of Donald Trump's party. And I think what you're going to see is, can he then address or take some of that appeal, build on that appeal for Donald Trump? Donald Trump won 2/3 of white non-college voters nationwide in 2020, right? So can he build on that? Yes, as Major said, as you said, across the Rust Belt, so to apply the lessons of Ohio out there. And then the second part of that is it might signal a kind of theory of the case, which is that this is a turnout election. And in that sense, Donald Trump and the Republicans are going to try to make sure that every part of what they already have as the base is out there and is motivated. And some of the themes that you've heard JD Vance talk about, that you hear Donald Trump talk about the economy, about that kind of populist rhetoric, some call it, those are things that could be motivating And that, again, speaks to this idea that this election is less about persuasion and more about turnout.
Of course, we continue to watch the roll call here in Milwaukee right now. I believe South Dakota is up, if not New Mexico. We only have a few more states left to go, even though Trump has already reached his delegate count, 1,215 needed. We're going to continue watching the RNC right now, but we are going to take a quick break. Stay right here. You are streaming CBS News 24/7.